Disco Elysium is one of the best works of art I've ever experienced. Here's a short list of some of my other favorite works of art, in no particular order. If you like these, you need to play Disco Elysium. This is less a review and more of a discussion about the game, mostly about the narrative and the themes, rather than the mechanics or the gameplay. I assume you've already played the game and don't mind spoilers, because from this point on, massive spoilers. Disco Elysium provides some of the best political, social, and philosophical critiques I've ever seen. I love it, but there's no way that I can bring you this video without the support of the Wild Pines group.
Have you ever wanted to ship something beyond the encroaching pale that will swallow us all? Do you fear that the pale will uncreate the sentimental value of the gifts you're shipping? The Wild Pines family cares deeply about your product and will do anything to keep your goods safe. Wild Pines, have fun, keep working. Use offer code TRUCEWITHFURIES for free pale insurance on your next order. Terms and conditions apply. Offer valid for a limited time. Wild Pines indemnifies itself against any lost goods due to violent shifts in physical reality, socio-political upheaval, or rich people hiding in the containers.
There is nothing. Only warm primordial blackness.
The first voice you hear in the game is your lizard brain. This is important. It establishes the biological imperative. We humans are slave to our bodies, and our lizard brains can override reason. And similarly, in this game, the body and the mind of the detective frames the world through a lens of a singular biological entity. The player character is not, like other games, a blank slate for you to control and experience a power fantasy.
Don't fuck with me! I have the power of God and anime on my side!
The character is someone with a past and a body, with limitations, intuitions, fears and desires, and all the other problems and biases that come along with being a human. Your body has problems that are sometimes insurmountable. The game wants to be sure that you know this, and also to let you know that your character knows this, because, as the detective puts it, I no longer want to be this kind of animal. The first line of the game establishes the rules that you are about to experience. The detective has a brain which can provide important skill checks, but it can also act against your interests. Choosing to face the world is a choice. Your lizard brain and even your limbic system does not want to face the world. Every action you take in this game is therefore framed from the beginning as fighting against your very own body. This is, for me, an exceptionally real take on what real life is like. We are all trapped in our mortal and limiting bodies, and can never really escape our past. Furthermore, we have intuitions, thoughts and desires that are very good at betraying us. It's honestly quite nice to play a character with a brain less trustworthy than my own. Who is the detective, though? Some of it depends on who you choose to be, but regardless of your actions, he's not a chosen one, or particularly important to this world other than being the main point of perspective for the story. Investigating the detective's past and his character is one of the two major quests in this game. Over the course of the story, you find out that his name is Harrier Dubois. He is an incredibly good detective, and incredibly bad at everything else. Harrier has been especially bad after his lover left him, but that's kind of normal for this type of story. He's what you would consider a noir anti-hero detective. We've seen this before. But what makes the game fresh is not really the tropes, but how they're explored and subverted. It's the fact that through the detective's fresh eyes as an amnesiac, you can discover the world that he inhabits. As a new child in this world, he is the perfect vessel for learning, from anew, the horrors of normality.
Time is not your enemy. Forever is.
There is nothing. Only warm primordial blackness.
Before I can talk about Disco Elysium and the Horrors of Normality, I need to talk about the Battle Angel Alita adaptation. It's a nice enough film about a perfectly innocent, girly robot badass who falls in love, kicks ass, loses her innocence, and beats up super predators. It's a PG-13 Robert Rodriguez film, which means it's... yeah. But the important part is that it's a James Cameron John Landau production, and they are absolutely amazing at making films financially successful by sacrificing literally anything in order to gain mainstream accessibility for American audiences. So what did they sacrifice or change from the... So what did they sacrifice or change from the original story? The original story is about an amnesiac with a mysterious past and connections to the bourgeoisie who gets guided by Best Boy into an absolutely horrible world where the rich exploit the poor by pitting them against each other, where they force the poor into their system without even providing them with basic rights or legal protection, but clamp down on any attempts to self-organize. It starts off with the protagonist investigating and arresting murderers, but it spirals outwards from there, where she comes to realize that every single person in the world is a victim to the larger system of exploitation that is imposed from above. That even the bourgeoisie who live comfortable lives in ivory towers are trapped and programmed within their roles to live a life without meaning. If you didn't get that from the film, don't worry, it isn't in there. The evils in the film are committed by a supervillain, a single person who does all the evil in the world. In the manga, when someone tries to rise above their station, smiling automated systems shoot them down and cut them up. And in the film, the supervillain is watching and presses a button to stop them. In the manga, the first minor villain is an addict who has been downtrodden and forced to commit violence in order to feed his addiction, which could have been prevented by a simple drug which is freely available to the rich. In the film, he's just some lackey working for the bad guys and he follows orders because... bad guys? In the manga, Vector is a troubled figure, a man willing to do what is necessary to further his goals, but doesn't want anyone to be harmed if he can help it. When he lies, it's because he believes it's the right thing to do, and yet without realizing it, he's helping to perpetuate the myth that the poor can rise above their station. In the film, he's a super predator, a selfish lackey of a supervillain willing to sell out his employees for a quick buck. In the manga, Destinova is a revolutionary, a victim of the system himself, who is experiencing a constant mental breakdown as he tries to break the shackles of his existence and destroy the system of oppression. He doesn't know what is real and what is not, yet he's the only character in the entire story with a solid grasp on reality. And in the film, he's a supervillain? And I think it's interesting to note that mainstream appeal, at least according to Cameron and Landau, is that villains have evil faces and evil intent, that they are created evil instead of being made to do evil despite their wishes, that people do bad things because they are inherently bad. Cameron and Landau have determined that people don't want to see stories where complex and self-sustaining systems of oppression cause people to do bad things that they don't want to do. You really should read Battle Angel Alita. It features a literal embodiment of rage against an unfair system. Anyway, with that out of the way...
I rage, therefore I am. But from whence does this endless font of fury come, that it cannot be quelled, no matter how I try?
Let me just explain what I mean by that. Think of the last time you saw a homeless person who asked for money. You probably did not give them the money, and in fact you probably did your very best not to acknowledge their existence. Or think of the last time you saw some natural disaster on the news and you scrolled to the next story. Think of the way you justify the existence of massive suffering in the world. Think of how you trick your mind into not thinking about the fact that there is immense suffering somewhere within driving distance of you right now. It's fine, we all do it. It's how we cope with seeing injustices we feel powerless to help with. That is the horror of normality. The horrible suffering we are exposed to on a daily basis, and it's just normal to us. We suffer more from unexpected changes to our personal environment than from seeing a malnourished child somewhere far away. I wrote this segment back in 2019, when I didn't think a global pandemic would fundamentally rob us of spare empathy for suffering. But that just makes things doubly true. We live in interesting times, and when we see systemic suffering, we try our best not to think about it. However, video games are different. Games have taught us that injustices are something you can face and combat. In classic BioWare games, every injustice introduced is something you can act upon. A city under quarantine can be healed by killing the nefarious do-badders. An evil king can be usurped by the true heir to the throne. Yet in this game, the injustices of the world are just as intractable as our own. Because we are seeing Revachol through the eyes of an amnesiac, it means we can experience the systemic injustice of this world as a fresh horror, rather than as the numbed, filtered normal suffering we're used to ignoring in the real world. If in the real world we were half as conscientious as we are in the video games we play, then just maybe we would have solved
Kindness. Warmth. Is this warmth part of being human?
It is.
I was just never aware of it until now.
Only warm primordial blackness.
I was never aware of it before, but now I think I know what it is.
Your conscious ferments in it.
What is
No larger than a
What is
single
this?
grain of
I don't
malt.
understand.
You don't have to do anything anymore. Ever. Never, ever.
The reason Harriet Dubois is in the Whirling Rag Hotel is because of a murder that he has to investigate. The crime seems simple. The union dock workers are striking for better wages and representation. In their little town, the union is the closest thing to a government or police authority that anyone knows. The corporation they work for sent over hired muscle to keep people in line during the strike. One of these mercenaries was throwing his weight around. Then he raped a woman, and then the dock workers lynched him. This sounds like a plausible story. The problem, however, is that the union completely admits to these events, with a lawyer present. What kind of union would admit to having lynched a man? And why is there a lawyer with them, telling them to admit to the lynching and nothing else? What sort of world is this, where confessing to murder is a better alternative than telling the whole truth? It turns out this simple crime is a fake cover story to cover up a much more complex and intricate scenario that even the witnesses don't understand. No one actually knows what's really going on, and this holds true for many of the stories you're likely to encounter, both in the game as in the real world. It's never, man was bad, people killed bad man, the end. Real life is just not that simple. Real life is complex, messy, and pathetic. You rarely, if ever, get the full story. More importantly, there is never a single diabolical villain who knows all of the facts and pulls all of the strings. Even the perpetrators of the crime don't know what's going on.
Fuck. Motherfucker. Motherfuck. Oh fuck. Oh fuck.
In your investigations, you find out that the mercenary who was killed didn't rape the woman as people claimed he did, but that he was definitely not a good person. He was a soldier with a disturbing and traumatizing past. A killer of men, and someone who coped with his horrible reality by imposing himself on others, and indulging in copious amounts of sex, drugs, and violence. Somewhat similar to our protagonist Harriet Dubois. This mercenary was not killed for these sins. You find out later that he was killed by an old communist soldier, a man who claims that he took a shot at a fascist who was imposing his will on others. So, this mercenary died not because he was evil, or because of any of his past or recent evil actions. He was killed because he was working for the wrong group, because of simple political extremism. However, if you keep interrogating the communist soldier, you find out that he was obsessed with a woman, and that this might be the real reason why he murdered the mercenary. That the politics was just an excuse. It turns out it was warped love that killed the mercenary. Suppose toxic masculine obsession. However, if you keep going, you find out that there's a creature that had a hormonal effect on the communist soldier, which caused him to become mentally unstable. So what's the real reason for the murder in Ravishol? You might have some of your own theories, but in order to formulate this theory, you need to look at the whole. You need to understand the current society, its history. You need to understand nature and biology and everything. A real investigation requires you not just to find the killer, but to understand everything that led to the murder. The motive, the murder weapon, the scene of the crime, the witnesses and extenuating circumstances. It requires you to apply a sort of critical theory and understand the whole. To investigate not just a crime, but a society.
This is where you say your bit.
Detective?
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Oh my fucking god! Enlightenment rationality started off as like a way to banish the mystic tyranny of feudalism and allow people to organize their lives with reason and logic instead of appeals to superstition. But over time, it became an edifice of justifying the rule of entrenched elites and the managerial class who have absorbed those sort of types of reasoning. It puts this patina of logic on just a huge mass death machine, because all they want is these fucking trade-offs, and everything needs to be reasoned out and rational. But at every point, it is just a way to stop people from thinking about how the present order of things is insane and bloodthirsty and cruel in a way that it doesn't have to be.
This is the city of Ravishol, a grand place, once the capital city of the world. But we don't know any of this when the detective wakes up. He's an amnesiac, and all he knows is what he sees. So let's begin small. The docks, Martinez. This is where you wake up. A few blocks where the crime took place. Martinez is a forgotten, decrepit little corner of the city of Ravishol. Things here are really bad. The police don't want to be here, so the local union has to take over matters of justice. There's a months-long strike going on. People are saying that the one city block has a curse on it because all the businesses fail. Franchises guard their shops with armed guards, and locals are only able to survive by relying on smuggling. As an amnesiac, this is the only world you know. You know suffering, inequality, and fear. The hopelessness of people who know that their lives don't matter. What is the rest of the city like? Well, you don't really know. You hear it's grand. You hear there are amazing malls and clubs and shopping districts and wonderful places where everyone wants to be. But all you've actually seen as a newcomer to this world is the suffering and cruelty. What unjust world does the detective live in that allows such a place to even exist? A world where the authorities would argue over who gets to not care about the most vulnerable district in the city. And then you come in as an agent of this authority that doesn't even want to be there, and you start imposing your will. You can make arrests and undermine the authority of the local union. Remember, before you showed up, the union was the only group of people in Martinez who were willing to enact any sort of justice. You are seen by the locals as an imperialist stooge who was not there when they needed you, but are now there to punish them. And they're absolutely right. So you wonder, why are things so bad here in Ravishol? Maybe you think it's that the slums are just normal in these fantasy settings, like the docks in Baldur's Gate 2. or the city of God. Unlike many generic sci-fi stories, the slums of Jamrock has an actual explanation. The authors of Disco Elysium have really thought about the implications of its world. Slums don't just exist because it's some law of nature. There is a reason. And the reason for this disturbing class division is not something quite as simplistic as corporations are bad, lol. It is entirely rooted in history, economics, and politics. Just like the crime you have to solve, just like everything else in this game, there are layers. The simple and easy explanation is that the area is cursed, and some people accept that explanation. They try to control it with spells and charms and RPG mechanics. Or maybe they think the situation is because incoming drugs are creating a crime syndicate. They want to control it by arresting the smugglers. Yet these drug smugglers are the only ones that support the local community, so maybe it's the union's fault. The leader is quite corrupt. So the corporation tries to take control by fighting their union leader. Or maybe things are bad because the corporation isn't paying their workers a fair wage. People try to take control and fight the corporation by striking. Yet why is the corporation able to exploit people to such an extent? In the real world of planet Earth this happens, but why does this exploitation of the working class happen in the world of Disco Elysium? Is there no government that can protect these people? A righteous king perhaps? A guild? A god? A chosen one? Well, no. And there's the problem. All that there is politics. What is the political reality of Disco Elysium? You would assume that it's some sort of democratic capitalism. You're in a modern cafe. People have freedom of movement and trade. People are diverse despite their racism, and no one seems to be afraid of you as a policeman. This feels like a typical modern nation state, yet it is not a democracy. Last century, the kingdom of Revachol was at the height of its power. They colonized the world and the kingdom was rich, but the rulers were corrupt and inept, and they didn't care about the people. Oh, and there was a plague. There was a plague and people lost trust in the existing systems and authorities. That felt less important when I wrote this 6 months ago. Anyway. This resulted, eventually, in a communist revolution. This all happened about 50 years ago. The revolution was bloody. It was demented and ugly as any political revolution could be.
Snake. Why are we still here? Just to suffer. Every night. I can feel my neck. My arm. Even my fingers.
It started as a civil war, but before a clear victor could be decided, a coalition of foreign governments invaded, killed all the communists, and took control. They cut the land into different districts that each government took control of, while they killed any opposition. The last place that the communists fled to was this one, Martinaise, and none of the foreign governments wanted to control the place where the communists were hiding, so they just let it rot. They only sent people in to kill the communists, and eventually it was in such a bad state that no one wanted it even if all the communists were dead. It was a hot potato. The only power who cares about it at all is the shipping company that uses the docks. All this means is that the city of Revachol is ruled from afar, by people who do not care about the residents. There is peace, but there is no democracy. The city is fully capitalistic. Ultra-liberal, the game calls it. All of the power is currently rooted in money. The only ones willing to be in Martinaise are the people who grew up there, the people who were forced to flee there, and the people who are there to profit off the labor from the residents. Yet there is one communist left, a man who says he's fighting fascists, but has been swooned by an ultra-liberal thief. In other words, there is no real government in the city of Revachol, and any community that tries to organize itself into a government will quickly find themselves with their backs to the wall. This is the world of Disco Elysium, a cruel and unjust place. And you are here among the most powerless people to be a witness to the victims of this world and its politics. Perhaps you think you could still make the world a better place by finding the truth, bringing justice to this community, and helping to integrate this district into an existing justice system. You could help save these people. A perfect playthrough should result in a happy ending, right? No.
Get lost, comedian! You cops had your chance. Now it's fucking time for some justice. Dick fuck!
Throughout your investigation, you may come to realize that people don't generally refer to this world's geography like we do. They don't really talk about continents and borders. They talk about isolas.
Isola.
They talk about isolas. They say that this island is located in an isola. What is that? And they get really uncomfortable if you try to get answers. Well, it turns out that you're not living on a planet floating in space like a normal person. The citizens of Revachol are living in a little bubble of reality that is surrounded on all sides by unreality. They call this the Pale. There are 7 pockets of reality in the known world, and these are broadly the major powers. Normal existence has matter, space, and time. Those laws of reality hold true no matter where you are or when you are in the universe. Terms and conditions apply. However, in the universe of Disco Elysium, the universe is shattering apart. Everyone seems to exist on the surface of a planet that is being eaten by the Pale. What is the Pale, though? The Pale is the opposite of reality. It is the utter destruction of space, time, energy, the laws of reality, and maybe even abstract concepts like logic and mathematics. We cannot measure it, predict it, or most likely even understand it. It is just a fact of life, like gravity or death. People can travel in between the pockets of reality through the Pale. However, this is dangerous and difficult. Beyond the physical risks, the journey also takes a psychological toll on all people exposed to the Pale. Passengers of the voyages report feelings of nostalgia and re-experiencing past events. This causes some people to theorize that the Pale is concentrated past catching up with reality. By the way, that is insanely cool world building. This is new for a sci-fi world. I love the ambition. It kind of reminds me of the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. So everyone living in this world knows that there is very limited space, that there are no more worlds to conquer, and all that's left to organize is what's left in this world into something manageable and bearable for those still living. Yet it feels like no one is acting as if this is true. Everyone is just carrying on as if the Pale is just this faraway thing that makes no difference to anyone, even though it's going to kill us all. It's a bit disconcerting, cynical even. Why does no one seem to care? Isn't the Pale terrifying? Isn't an existential threat to our species the perfect motivation for humanity to get its shit together? Apparently not. Next, we get to the woman, an ex-lover who hurt the detective by leaving him. He is obsessed with this woman, and yet we never see her face or find out anything about her. Because ultimately, who she is does not matter to the detective. In his dreams and waking nightmares, he sees her not as herself, but as Dolores Day, the local version of Saint Mary, or Queen Victoria. The detective's ex isn't really a woman, she's a figure, a symbol of motherly love as well as fearful awe. You can get drunk and call her. Ultimately, the detective doesn't really listen to what she says. It is heartbreaking. And even though we hear her voice, we still gain essentially zero information about her, except that she's had enough of you. You can hear in her voice kindness, patience, and disappointment so deep that it aches.
Hello? Oh no. Is that you?
What's up? What's up?
Oh God. You're drunk.
What's up? What's up?
Oh no. Please stop. Please, let's just hang up. I'm going to hang up now, okay?
If this was another game or show, I would have assumed that it's just typical erasure of women's voices that we tend to get in male-focused media, like specifically the noir detective genre. However, there are many other strong female voices. A lawyer who chooses to protect her community instead of escaping poverty. A corporate spy who's just trying to cope with her... A corporate spy who's trying to cope with her regrets while she yearns for a better world. A resourceful cartel organizer with a complex character. A programmer trying to prove a point about data corruption and off-site backups. And a self-interested but self-aware, rational operator with deep regrets that she never speaks of. Yet the woman that you, the detective, is obsessed with is an image of perfection rather than a real person. This indicates to me that the writers of Disco Elysium aren't making a mistake here. This is a purposeful critique of noir tropes and patriarchal obsessions. The game allows you to adopt extreme views, to become a fascist who hates women, to become a communist who calls her bourgeoisie scum. I suspect that no matter which ideology you choose, by the end of the game the detective's mind will think of her as an enemy, in the language of whatever flavor of hatred you choose. The exploration of Harry's ex-lover also ties into the pale. The past. The fact that we romanticize our past, but that it catches up to us and destroys us. That we humans are very bad at learning from our past, yet still suffer because of it. The woman is Queen Victoria. She is the great leader of our past, who united the world with great patience and great violence, and extended the power of a patriarchal system. And right after confronting your ex, the game will confront you with the murderer, a man who is similarly obsessed with a woman, who fell in love with the woman he is stalking and who ended up murdering a man because of this. Is Harry that different from this man? Harry is very much like the broken people of Saint Martinet, except for one major difference, which is how he expresses his violence. The truth is that Harry is a reflection of your prejudices. Kim. Kim is an enabler. He's a bad partner. Griffith did nothing wrong, and the free market will regulate itself.
Would you care to join me?
No thanks.
Come on, join me.
Ah! Stop it! We're not kids!
I surrender. You've won the day. You, my friend, are stubborn.
At least it is true that man has no control, even over his own will.
So at the end, you put everything together. The curse, the union, the old communist soldier, and the murder he committed. And the answer to why did he kill the mercenary is not simple. It's not politics or love. It's not even just because the phasmid had a hormonal effect on the man. There just isn't a clear or simple answer. You get to tie a bow on your investigation, even if you're not sure what that bow is. You followed up on all the leads and got all the explanations for everything. You investigated the entire society. On top of that, you also investigated the story of each of the individuals involved in this mess, because everything is interlinked. Easy explanations are usually just oversimplified stories that we tell ourselves, and this story requires a thorough investigation. Our small minds are unable to grasp this massive, complex world that we live in, and we just want to reduce it into something simple and understandable. In that translation from reality to personal narrative, we lose nuance and truth. It's why the Battle Angel Alita adaptation reduced the complexity of its story, and ended up with the interpretation that a bad situation is normally caused by a few bad apples, rather than a complex system that is more powerful than any individual within it. The same applies to almost all works of art that I consider the best. If someone tells you their interpretation of The Wire, Evangelion, or Battle Angel Alita, it will be massively oversimplified to the point of probably being wrong about the core message of the show. Even the oversimplified media we consume is too complex for our minds. But Disco Elysium does have some messages that I think are clear. The creators of the game want you to understand that capitalism easily overrules democracy. That people who call for democracy in a capitalistic system can easily be painted as violent rabble-rousers. The creators of the game want you to understand that if people don't have a voice, this is what it looks like. They want you to experience poverty and hopelessness so that you can't just dismiss it out of hand when describing your ideal system. So remember when I said that none of this matters? Surely solving a crime, bringing justice and truth to the world should matter, and the politics that result in suffering even more so. Well, yes, except the Pale is advancing. In 28 years, the world will go from existence to inexistence. Nothing will be left. The natural environment itself is eating everything, and even if there were a way to stop it, it's too late now. It turns out the Pale is caused by humans, but no one understands it. Since it seems to be our concentrated past, maybe it's the karmic consequence of all humanity's actions. All of our sins and all of our regrets. Everything that brought us to this point, coming back again. Regardless of the reason, everyone and everything you know will be inconceivably gone in 28 years. Just about when the detective turns 70. Does it really matter then? Fighting for justice and equality, or nationhood, or anything at all, if it'll all be gone soon. Disco Elysium opens with this quote: "The Furies are at home in the mirror." This is the opening line from a poem called Reflections by R.S. Thomas. Thomas was a Welsh nationalist who hated the English occupation and Anglicization of his homeland. Fuck the English. He was, like the nationalists in the city of Ravenshaw, ruled from afar by people with little interest in his culture or history. The Furies are ancient Greek figures of vengeance. They bring death to those that break their oaths or harm their kin. So basically what this poem is saying is that the greatest vengeance we suffer is that which we inflict upon ourselves. This holds true not just for individuals, but for all of humanity. Our end will be brought about by our own doing. The entire theme of Disco Elysium is reflection, and the harm we bring upon ourselves. Harriet Dubois is often a reflection of the world you see around him. If you punch Measurehead, the detective becomes the new Measurehead. Like the mercenary and his lover, the detective used drugs to escape from his past. Like the Hardy Boys, the detective enacts his own justice based on his own judgment. Choosing to help or doom the refugee from Orania is a choice that is within his power, just like the Hardy Boys. Like the killer, Harry is obsessed with a woman he barely understands. And like the killer, Harriet explains her away as an enemy using the language of politics he's chosen to adopt. The biggest difference between Harry and the others is that Harry turns his feelings inward rather than outward. Where the mercenary takes out his anger on others, Harry takes it out on his own body, his job, and the objects around him. Where the killer gets rid of his feelings of jealousy by using a gun, Harry does the same with speed and a clipboard. How different is this cursed world really from our own? Climate change may not be as bad as the Pale, but it's pretty terrifying. More than that, though, isn't it mind-numbingly disturbing that the entire universe is fatal to us humans, except for this tiny surface on Earth that is surrounded by an infinitely large sphere of death? The world of Disco Elysium is surrounded by the Pale rather than space, but their environment is temporary and small, just like in your world. Seeing the Pale as space or climate change is not a perfect metaphor. I don't believe it's a coincidence that Harry will be 70 when the world ends. I think the Pale also represents death of any kind, your past and your life catching up with you, a point at which we will become lost in the past. Death itself and the end of our own existence. I think the Pale is also age, the shrinking world we inhabit as we get older, more set in our ways and more trapped by the prisons we create for ourselves. Just like the citizens of Ravenshall, just like the apes duking it out on a broken planet, we are exactly as oblivious and just as short-sighted. Myself especially. Oftentimes I feel lost and disturbed and helpless to do anything. I cope by trying to make life a little bit better for my fellow humans and distracting myself with entertainment. I think that whatever you feel the message of the game is very similar to how you operate in the real world. This game reflects you and it reflects your views of the world. While games like Dark Souls condition you to fit into their world, this game conditions itself to be a reflection of your world. Thomas played this game and said that he thinks he's in limbo, cursed to suffer for all eternity. I asked him if he was talking about the game or the real world, and he said both. In Disco Elysium, you make very little impact on the world. You don't save the world or even the town. You just solve a crime, and maybe prevent a few deaths. What do you wish you could do in the world of Disco Elysium to make things better? Become mega rich and fix things with your wealth? Overthrow the capitalist system? Just help the people that you know with your limited power? Well, are you doing that in the real world? Because most of the limitations that exist in the game also exist in the real world. As Joyce says, if you critique capitalism, it swallows it up, monetizes it, and becomes strengthened by it. You can't overthrow capitalism in this game because doing so in the real world is similarly impossible. And you can't become a billionaire because, well, there's only a few of them, and there's over 1 billion other people. The authors know the futility of attempting to change the world as an individual because they were involved in a cultural movement. They know what it takes to change the world, and how impossible it is to challenge the current order of things. They are aware of the limitations of humanity and of the modern world. Disco Elysium is the closest thing I've ever seen to a reflection of reality. In Thomas's words, this entire gaming experience is an extension of your very first confrontation with the mirror. In Greek mythology, Elysium is the afterlife, the endless fields of vast riches that humanity will dwell in. Yet, isn't that what we have now? There are more overweight people in the world than there are starving people. We have abundance today, and so does the world of Disco Elysium. It's just organized badly. The problem is not the Earth, but humanity's systems. So what does the name Disco Elysium even mean? It used to be called No Truce with the Furies. The Furies are at home in the mirror, and this game is about reflections, similarities, taking responsibility for your past. Reflections not just between the characters, but reflections of our own world in this Disco Elysium. A spinning mirror ball with dumb apes duking it out to win. Each facet of this reflected world a different aspect of our own.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I loved making this video and I hope that you too can relate to Disco Elysium's portrayal of existential anxiety. Or if you know some good books that make it feel like humanity has hope for a better future, please recommend them down below. I could use some more hope.